Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this live Docomomo online talk. This talk marks the start of our planned autumn series of events, and it is our first event since lockdown commenced in March, when unfortunately our spring and summer series of talks had to be abandoned. But actually it feels great to be back. Now, because we are online, I might need to actually welcome some new participants who in the past have not been able to attend one of our talks or tours, but have been able to join us tonight. So let me just say, it's great to have you on board.
Oh, John Forrest.
So just to let you know also that our program is scheduled to remain online for the time being. So we obviously hope that you'll be able to join us again in future. Now, we went into lockdown on a Dutch theme. Professor David Porter had talked to us about, just in the nick of time, about the brilliant housing scheme which he and Neve Brown had undertaken for a site in Scheveningen. And tonight, coincidentally, we continue that Dutch theme. But before I introduce Philip, who is talking tonight, can I please ask you to observe some housekeeping rules for us, for the well-being of the event. Please can you mute your sound unless you're invited to ask a question. We would also like it, if you have the bandwidth, if you could keep your video on. So it is always nice to see friendly faces. And please, can you use the chat button or the chat facility to ask a question? If not, can you raise your hand using the hand raise function? We would prefer for you to use the chat facility to keep things nice and orderly. And obviously, if both of those fail, we'd be happy to see everyone raise their hand if we can catch them. Tonight, anyway, let me start. We're really, really lucky to have Philip Boyle, our Docomomo coordinator, to talk to us about Rietveld's houses. This is a subject which I know Philip has written on and taught about. And his talks are always thought-provoking, revealing, and brimming with fascinating detail. So, oh, sorry, finally, I did need to just tell you, we are recording this event and questions will be taken after Philip's talk. Now that's out the way, can I please allow me, would you please allow me to welcome Philip? Philip, thank you.
Thank you. You can hear me, can you? Yeah. Yeah. Right. I won't repeat what's on the screen here, but basically my interest in going back to Rietveld was that the heroic period that the Smithsons defined back in the 1920s is a long way back, but is actually full of detail of things that I hope we can draw out. And I wanted to start with the Still group, who were essential to that period. This is a picture of Truss Schroeder and Rietveld in their 30s. I'm not sure what they're talking about, but it's in her flat. I will deal with the famous house in Utrecht, mainly in this talk, but I'm going to talk about other houses as well. Briefly, I'm going to start by having a sort of description or some quotes from the Still group, then talk about the Schroeder house, then a number of other dwellings, residential things that Rietveld did, 6 or 7 of them. So there's quite a lot to get through. Right, Dutch Still group was an attitudinal group and a manifesto. I've got 2 quotes here, one from Rietveld himself. I'm not quite sure where it came from, but I'm pretty sure it's right, where he says he does not think that function is a point of departure, but was a sound approach. Function was accidental, casual need, which would change with time. Indeed, always changes in time. He was a maker of things and came to architecture sideways, and clearly meeting architects, this was a reaction that he came up with. The second quote I've got here is one from Theo van Dersberg, the main mover of de Stil, in his notebook, and it was right at the end of his life. We are only interested in life. I won't read it all verbatim, but anyway, we're only interested in life. Let's refresh ourselves with things that are not art. Right, so that's where de Stil was starting from. The bathroom, the WC, the bathtub, the telescope, the bicycle, the auto, subways, the flatiron. There are many people who think there are many people who can make these unartistic things, but they're hindered. Their movements are dictated by the priests of art. I mean, large rhetoric, okay? Art, whose function nobody knows, hinders the function of life, and for the sake of progress, we must destroy art, because the function of modern life is to be stronger than art. This is the sort of thing that people said in the 1920s, and it's based on things that came a little bit earlier than that. There's a man called Schoenmaker who wrote a book called The Principles of Plastic Mathematics, and he claimed that positive mysticism, in which we translate reality into constructions controlled by our reason, later to recover these constructions in nature, thus penetrating plastic vision. A difficult thing to grasp, but he had grand hopes for this. It was going to be born of light and sound and create heaven on earth. Okay, that was a book anyway at that time that they already all picked up on. And the two main proponents of this were the painters, Theo van Dersberg and Piet Mondrian. Here's some snaps of Theo van Dersberg with his muse and wife, Nelly. They were propagandists and were the editors of that main magazine and led the main movement until when he died in 1932, where it rather fizzed out. He was a painter, and in his painting, this is from his Catalogue Raisonné, in about 1917, based on this theory, they clearly moved towards abstraction from naturalism. There's a series of drawings of a cow that gets progressively more abstract. That's still then recognizable as a cow, but became unrecognizable. Well, perhaps it was a cow or not, but became abstract as a result of this theory. Mondrian, the other more famous painter, started from the same point of view, but he took it right to its logical extreme. He reduced everything down to a simple, as you can read here, I'll move on, the pictures where his pictures and where he lived blended into one thing. His studios were amazing places which were transformed by his art. He was more solitary than Van Dersberg, but his art moved on. This is his apartment in Paris. He completely and he ended up painting like that. I'm sure we're all fairly familiar with that. Coming on to architecture, the group themselves, in 1923, Van Dersberg managed to, or in an effort to get a job, an architectural job actually, he got the art promoter Hans Rosenberg to put on this exhibition in Paris. And it only lasted for a month, but the list of names you got there is quite interesting. Theo van Dersberg himself, Cor van Esten, who was a young architect who later on became a planner in Amsterdam, Huszar, a painter, and a painter, Oud, an architect, Rietveld, who was then a furniture designer, Mies van der Rohe, who was involved with the magazine G at that time, involved in this exhibition, and Jan Wils, an artist who conversed with Eileen Gray. Their exhibit really had an enormous effect on a number of people. This is the only picture I can find of it, but there were models here made by Rietveld. This one here was this prospective house for Rosenberg, and these are the plans of it on the wall. Behind, a model of a house for an artist. We'll see drawings of it in a minute. On the wall, picture of Oud's scheme for a factory. Again, a model of this was made by Rietveld as someone who could make models at that time. In this room, pictures. This is the model that Cor van Esten made. You see a fairly rough model of a house for an artist. what has been published and is better known as these marvelous axonometrics, where you can really see what Van Doesburg and Van Esten were trying to do in abstracting space. And they used the architectural convention of an axonometric so that color and the way you divide up space could be done. There was a plan for the house, an artist. It really worked. There were stairs and rooms. But the main thing about it was the abstraction of the planes that made up in 3 dimensions. The main influence of that exhibition actually was on Le Corbusier. I've cut out pictures of it, but the main entrance hall to the Maison La Roche he was designing at the same time. You can see it moving from rooms to abstraction very clearly in the same direction as most of the drawings you saw there. Back to Rietveld, here he is earlier outside his workshop with his mates and the workshop being on the street, a child from the street, on a version of his famous chair. You can see that's plain and uncolored and still has side panels. But he started out, he learned to do architectural drawing and went to classes in architecture. The furniture he admired was this mobile Klappheimer, where you could see basic, very simple furniture that he was again reducing and making more and more abstract. Until eventually, under the influence of the 2 painters, or the other painter, all of them, came to his famous red and blue chair. Here's a monochrome view of it with its side panels. What you notice is that the orthogonal way that the pieces of wood fit together. The way he joined his things together, called a Cartesian joint, you could join 3 pieces of orthogonal wood together by the means of dowels, which is is actually quite a traditional way of joining things, but he took it to break down his new thing. And you can see that same thing carries on. Here's a light fitting from the house where you have again the 3 orthogonal elements, this time being light bulbs, but separated and non-joined and supported from above. Again, the same thing shown. This was he was doing interiors and furniture at that time. This is a working drawing chair that you put together. The thing to note about this is that he's become or calling himself an architect at this point in time. And of course, that chair was the father of flat pack and dowel, things that go through today to IKEA. He did other furniture built together in the same way and interiors. The joint that he was dealing with is not that new. It occurs in a painting of this period and not particularly sophisticated piece of joinery. But what it did do was it broke down the elements of the chair. Here is Rietveld in the 1920s with 3 of his children. He had 6 children. I think it's Sunday, and he's out with his straw hat and a trolley he's made. And again, that's done in the same way as the chair, joined together with the wheels and the colors, and the same sort of detailed working drawing they did to make these things. Family is quite an important thing. I'm going to talk about it a bit in a second. Anyway, there a picture of him and his chair. I'm now going to talk about the famous client for his house that he designed in Utrecht. This was a joint venture. So Truss Schroeder, born in 1889, came from a wealthy family. Her father owned a textile company. Unfortunately, her mother died when she was 4, and her father remarried shortly afterwards. She did not get on particularly well with her stepmother. She was educated in a convent and trained to be a pharmacist. She visited Britain. She stayed in London for a little bit. She came back, and then at the age of 22, she married F.A.C. Schroeder, who was again a wealthy factory owner in Brabant. And they had 3 children over a period of time. And unfortunately, she was widowed at 33. So she was widowed, but clearly well provided for financially. She had moved in arty circles in Utrecht and knew the Distill people, and she'd had Rietveld modify the flat, modify the rooms in the flat where she lived, mainly by painting the ceilings and the walls slightly darker, altering the perception of the space. But becoming a widow, she reconsidered her life. The large sort of house, she could have lived in any sort of house, but she and Rietveld decided that she wanted to live her own way in her own manner, which meant a house from scratch up. So they searched for sites and found this one, which is marked by an arrow on the edge of Utrecht, and came up with something very simple to go on this, basically a two-story house. It was built against the gable end wall of a terrace, which I think we'll show in the next one. Now, I want to spend some time on this slide. At the bottom, you can see where this house was located, at the end of a terrace, at the edge of the town, on a gable end wall, was the sort of wall that people described as the place when people go home from a drink at night, they go and have a pee against it before carrying on. A rather strange place at the end of the town with greenery outside. So this two-story house that they wanted to do, they stuck on the gable end wall. I've got plans above. There are 6 plans here. It's a two-story house. Basically, this floor here, this is the ground floor plan of the two-story house. And above, there was what they had to describe as an attic, because living rooms had to be on the lower floor, and they didn't want to draw attention to the fact that it didn't have a pitched roof, which most things required. The other plans here are quite interesting because they actually describe the construction of this thing, which is quite complicated and hybrid. It had a basement as well as a ground floor and an attic. But around the basement, you can see that the foundations went down, and above these piers that you can see here, dividing it into 3, there were steel columns that rose up. And they rose up through the upper floors, sometimes occurring in walls and sometimes not, depending on which floor they were at. So going to the ground floor, because it had 3 external walls, you entered it in the middle. It had a kitchen on the right, a small study or maid's room to the left, because she could afford that sort of thing. It was intended to have a garage, which was this space here. It never actually was used as a garage, but that's what it initially was intended to be, and storage below. A staircase in the middle with a flue going up, and above an attic, which has a staircase and a flue running through it. Looking at that floor there, you can see that there are also 3 external balconies at first floor level, 1 on the front roadside, 2 over the entrance on this side, and one to the rear. The lower 2 plans here, they show that within the steel structure, the joists that run across, a void for the staircase and the flues to run up. Right, that's again these things in sections so that you can see where they are. You can see that the elevations are quite varied, and that the planes of the windows and the balconies, are fairly asymmetrical. In terms of height, the floor to ceiling height's quite high, about 2 and 8, nearly going up to 3, not quite 3 meters, a bit less, which meant that vertically, in the 2 floors, it was possible for windows to be divided, to a sill, a window, and a clear story. Sill, window, clear story. So it's a small volume, but with large openings. Looking at this in axonometric from the outside, you can see it gets even more complicated. That the 3 balconies I was talking about are held up by steel columns on the outside with railings, and sometimes they have got small railings that are open. At other places, the planes are filled in solid. This is the entrance door, the front with a seat light, and plain pieces of wall, some of which have got a steel beam in, some of which haven't, and a roof light sticking out the top over the whole thing. A view of it from the outside, it looked over fields. It now has a motorway, which you look over. There it is in all its glory and its sudden appearance at the end of this terrace. You can see that the elements I've been describing to you architecturally are treated differently, that it is painted like a Mondrian painting, some parts painted, other bright colors, others kept plain. Things like the drain water pipe, it just happens where it happens. There's a small garden outside, and as you move around it, and in different light of day, what is bright and what is blank, shadows, light reveals the planes, and suddenly this great abstract thing has happened, because it is abstract. Getting closer to it, we're looking from the street now. This is where it was intended originally to be the garage, but became a sort of guest room office. And the apartment, which I'll move on to. Moving inside, sorry, on this lower floor here, you can see there's steel, outside steel, which holds up the balcony, and another one which forms a mullion between the windows, and a transom as well horizontally. They again, three-dimensionally, it becomes suddenly a bay window, a clerestory light with the transom being a plane. So the whole thing is really completely an abstract sculpture, and I don't think anything, even with the constructivists, had got quite this extraordinary by this date. Going round to the entrance, again, there are these flat planes that again do not relate, well, they serve functions, but again, their dimensions and proportions to each other are completely abstract. They're completely free to do jobs like recess, come forward, shade, incorporate a drain pipe. This small one here with the red thing, which is quite brighter than anything else, is actually, if you're a tradesman visiting here and you want to make a delivery, you ring a bell here. There is a sound thing which, like on a ship, which you can speak to whoever's on the top floor, and they can say, well, open it, and they open the little door there, and you put the goods in there and leave them, and the man goes away. This is from the attic floor above. Of course, it wasn't really an attic. She wanted to live in the space above separately. She had her 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The boy was the eldest, and the two younger children. They were all to live in this space on the first floor. Going in, when you're in the entrance hall, the staircase starts already in the entrance hall, and the gas meter and the electric fuse board are there for you to see. There is a shelf and a place for putting letters. There is a seat on this pile of steps here in the hall, which means that the staircase itself is somewhere where you can stop. You really do stop there, because that's the ante-room, if you like, to the space that you're going to go up the stairs and experience afterwards. The rooms at this lower level do have clerestory. This is a plan where we were going in. That's that staircase with the gas meters there. What we're looking at there actually is the kitchen area here, which has a large number of fittings, including a dumbwaiter. So it being a small house for a family, it could have made someone who cooked and then moved the food upstairs, and various fittings for cooking with. This is a better view of that plan. Some of the other things that are worth noting about, well, what they really show you is how these describe how things change in different directions. This is the small office inside, to the right of you. Dark ceiling to lower it, a clerestory above, which links you to where that landing occurs before you go upstairs. So spatially, these rooms are all composed to relate to each other visually. Back to this hall where you enter up to the stairs above, you can see how the light above is brighter, but there is light from these clerestories that this is a fairly well-lit space, although it's quite small. Right, moving up to the first floor, which was to be occupied and in which they were to live in. The first thing, if you came up that stairs, you come up, you're bang in the middle of it, is go back to the outsides. There is a balcony here, and a balcony here. They relate to sort of zones or parts of this space that belong to the members of the family. This back end here, which it looks out, is just showed as her bedroom, her bed there, and her balcony, and her basin. On this side, you have the son, his bed, his basin, his balcony, and the 2 daughters, their beds, their basin, their balcony. So the makeup of this floor has got everybody. It's a democratic thing in that everybody has their own sort of little things they can use. There are in fact 5 basins up here. Flue and a stove in the middle, WC and door, another basin and butler sink. And this space, now I'm now showing it to you larger. What I've marked here in red is sliding partitions, because everybody having their balcony and their area, they clearly wanted their privacy as well as sharing the space in the middle. That shows the partitions in their closed position, right? There we are with them out. So you can see that her bedroom is absolutely minute, as well as the sink. There is the feeder tank for the water hanging up here, and the dumbwaiter from down below. It's completely utilitarian. The girls' room, the boys' room. The main living part in this corner here, the area which is occupied by these large windows that open to the outside. A 3D of that, axonometric. You can see there's a grand piano that can go in the boys' room, and this drawing actually shows a piano as well. She lived in this house she lived to the age of 95 in this house at Schroeder, although the children moved out. It got used in a lot of different ways. I'm going to show you in the middle now, this is the light, how the light comes down through in the middle. Again, these glazed partitions here, they fold away or fold in. This is looking back to the main space from the top of the staircase to the opening over the main part of the living area with the 2 windows at right angles, a table on which everything took place, a communal sink. Showing this a bit more. This is with a clear story with the windows, the blinds that can come down for privacy at night, but you still can have the night by night and night by day furniture. That's for the daytime, nighttime, daytime. Moving back, her bedroom, so the water tank above, the bathroom to the side here. It's all actually, having had to talk about functions, everything has a sort of use. Sort of is useful. Yet the only photo I could photo of her with her daughter in that space, rather overexposed. And I don't know which daughter it is, but looking back at you. From the outside, of course, the best view until the motorway was built, you could fling open those windows and let the space, simple casement windows that open. Back in the middle, the stove, the area which might have been the piano, it's got the red chair in there. You can see that the way that when the partitions are back, the way they're held up is painted. Storage, again, ventilation, heating, different height windows, balconies, boys' balcony, which could be storage units, everything to that. So it's looking backwards through this window that's so extraordinary from the street, it's also extraordinary from the inside, that the sheer sculptural plasticity of it all, quite dazzling. Boys' room again, various ways in which the partitions can close the area off. A detail of furniture, because the chairs and the tables, how they were designed. Just as a quick quote now, based on this building, Smithson quite rightly pointing out that the combination between Schroeder and Rietveld was a piece of manual intuition. He was a maker of things. There are other architects that work this way as well, but not that many. When the house was finished, this is in 26, the great and the good came to visit. This is Rietveld being visited in his own house by Mart Stam, stylish young architect in stylish gear. El Lisitsky, a traveling Soviet, I'll describe him as that there. Rietveld at his door, which happens to be a stable door. This, I think, is very much to do with children. He had his 6 children. Schroeder had 3 children. The Schroeder house actually had a door like this as well. They may well have gone in afterwards, and you could see those with the pictures on the wall there. This is him a bit later. This is the famous picture of the Great and the Good at the first Siam conference with Madame de Mondreau, Corbe, Pierre Jeanneret, Pierre Chéreau, and here's Rietveld in here, rather cheeky looking. Right, I'm going to go on now to some of the other work. I'm going to, because of the time, go through this fairly fast. He and Trish Schroeder worked on a number of other things together, but one thing that he didn't work on was something where he was trying out things, which was a small conversion of a garage for a man who wanted his chauffeur in a separate building with the cars as well. And it was an experiment in concrete panels, which in Holland, concrete panels fixed to a steel frame. So unlike the Schroeder house, well, like the Schroeder house, it was a steel structure, but the experiment was in how you put panels on the outside. And they were, as you can see, the whole thing is designed to fit dimension. They're the garage doors that slide, panels above it, held together. This is the interesting bit. The panels are held by bolts back to a frame. The bolts go straight through these straight pieces of steel here. This thing leaked like a sieve. But it was, in terms of him being a maker, he was out to experiment, and that's what it looked like. It's one of the only, these are this timber actually made into the concrete panels, done with a pattern. Schroeder and Rietveld, of course, like everybody in that period, were interested in generalized housing, and without sites or without jobs, they did a number of studies of what they called rationalized cores for terraced housing. This is a sort of rough model that shows core, where you tried to put together all the things that you needed in the house as tightly as possible in order to leave the available area you had for whatever you had to pay for it to get it put up, a space to use, to live in. In a way, it goes on from the Schroeder house, where you could see all the functional things were related to each person. With a generic house, perhaps, you know, if you put them together, you could. And they went through various studies where you study the middle, you try to put your heating, your bathroom, your staircase. Dutch staircases are extraordinary what they can do in the middle to free up space in the middle. And they did a number of schemes where you can see the centers had done this to open up these large spaces, either side opening out for you to use. This coincided with existence minimum and all that sort of stuff that was going on then, that people around Europe were interested in. And you can see the large windows in the rooms and the split levels. Everything in the middle is tried to be tight. It's done through drawings, models. Again, trying with panel systems. Here you can see on the outside of this building, that the outside you could have panels you could add or subtract depending on how much light, what you wanted, and everything in the middle tied as a core. They tried with different materials, that if you did with steel bent, put things together. I mean, this is you know, different ways of putting things together. They got clearly joined, being in Siam, the Frankfurt Siam conference. Everybody produced their marvelous little tight dwellings on the universal sort of way of drawing them. And there's their attempt. Not much achieved in terms of space, and they're down to a very small size, but they tried it again and again and again in different ways. Some got nearer being done as terraces, and eventually Trish Schroeder herself, she managed through, because the Schroeder house by now had some notoriety, and they got to build a terrace, which is quite near it, of 4 and eventually 5 terrace houses, where they put this into practice. And you can see here the results of having a core with everything tight, these large windows lighting from the outside and into the spaces inside, which came out at quite large sizes. Also using the sliding partitions. So this is a sort of generic evolution of what in practice they've experimented with in their own house. And these actually got built. I'm now going to talk about a building that no longer exists, which was the conversion of no, it wasn't a conversion. There was a man called Jan Nieland who was very keen on the cinema and had a cinema in the centre of Utrecht and wanted to update it. Rietveld, like with most of his jobs, he acquired them, I think, through shared interests in trying to solve some sort of problem or other. And he got quite involved in film projection, did Rietveld, and talked to this man. And eventually he got to build this cinema inside, which was on a backland piece facing on, that's the interior of the cinema. I'm going to go and show you the plan because it's quite difficult to understand. This plan you got here, well, here you can clearly see where this cinema is. It's on a piece of backland facing onto a square, which is along this line here. There's a big square. You had a frontage there that ran this distance here. And what you're looking at in this photo here is the frontage across here, which ran across there. There was a freestanding shop, which is that bit there. Then you had a lobby for entering the cinema and a staircase for entering the flats above. A lobby, a foyer to the cinema, its toilets, and then the cinema itself. Now the part here, back here, runs up three stories above this, which you can see going up this way here. I'll show it to you in a drawing. Here's the elevation, clearly. So you can see on the photo, same photos you saw before. Here's the entrance to the cinema, the entrance to the foyer,
apartments
above, and the shop at the side. The above, there were three apart. One, whoops, I'll go back. 1, 2, 3. And you can see the lower ones have got these panels to show to get you to the cinema. You had these all lit up on the front in this large square, and between the bits are lit up are the windows to the flats. And the top flat, Rietveld, he didn't have normal sort of contracts for doing jobs like architects conventionally do. He sort of bargained with people. And this man, having got him been helpful in getting the cinema done, he agreed to design all that. He didn't ask for a fee, but he said, could he have the top floor flat? And he could. He had got the top floor flat free of rent, and this was by 1936. And he actually lived there on this top floor with the six children and his wife through World War II until beyond. Now, this is the plan of his flat on the top floor. What it had, relative to the ones below, it had a 11-meter long window on the front, which runs here. And you entered it at the back, and it was basically one space for the 6 of them. Or 8, apparently, 6 children, 8 of them. There are 8 around the dining table. Okay, just to describe this, where you come in you come up the stairs, and near there's a shower and a basin. You come in the middle of this space. To this side here, there is an alcove, which is the parental bedroom with a basin, 2 beds. There is a grand piano. On this side, there is a kitchen, a long sort of galley kitchen, fenced off on one end, with a door and a wall behind it. At this end, you have a series of cubicles for the poor children. Well, I say poor children, the children, I don't know how poor it was or not, but they slept behind curtains at this end here, and then there's a bathroom at the middle there. In the middle, there's a flue with a stove, and on this side, of course, there was this 11-meter window overlooking the square. And here is Mr. and Mrs. Rietveld in that flat with their grand piano, with the curtain to their bedroom. The kitchen is behind this wall, the dining part. You can see the light of this, and in this photo, it's quite interesting photo, the light from this large window illuminates the whole place. But clearly at night, they needed light over the table, and this is a light fitting. This is another light fitting. A chair table. So that's what you're looking at there in the corner there. At the top here, there's a joiner photo which shows you the whole thing in 360 degrees. So if you start at this side, this is the corner over by the kitchen. Here's the 11-meter long window. Here's the end wall of the curtained children's room, the flue for the stove, the light in the middle, the entrance, Garrett himself coming in, a wardrobe, the either happy or unhappy children dotted around. So I suppose you can just see what it was like. So they lived in this sort of open space, open like this with the stove, through the wall. There gets a view again, looking over the scope. This is all gone now, so this is the only record things I can find of this thing. But it's a strange comment on. Anyway, they lived for free in this large loft with a large window. There again, piano practice, meals.
Podcast. Philip Boyle.
So, again, I'll just end up doing it just so you can grasp that sort of space. Rietveld himself sitting there. So there's his famous chair, but some other chairs as well. It's all very down to earth and livable. I'm now going, he did do, and I'm confining myself to houses that he did. I've got here now a series of 6 houses, and I think, how are we doing? I've got another 20 minutes, right. So 20 minutes. There are 4 different sorts of people and different sorts of size. They're mainly for friends of his, and they're mainly done on quite small budgets. This one here for, if I can pronounce it correctly, Stekli. He was originally from Hungary, but married a Dutch woman. He was the first violinist in the Hungarian quartet, and was, more importantly, the concertmaster for the main concert hall in Amsterdam in 1940. He got himself a plot in a nice leafy suburb near Haarlem, and he's famous for his Rhapsody in violin for Bela Bartok, of course, was a news composer. So his house was, if you like, a house for a violinist. Here it is. It's in a suburb. The planning rules dictate pitched roofs. But you can see that this is the approach side of the house. To show a place, it's quite difficult. Here's a layout plan anyway. You approach it on a corner of a road. So you come in at one side here with a garage at the back and the house to the left. So you come in round this side, garage, the entrance is off the side here. This is for reasons of orientation. You can see that the ground floor is bigger than the upper floors with having a pitched roof. The top of this part of the ground floor is an open terrace. The ground floor plan, the curves responding to the shape of the site at the front, actually. But you enter it in the middle. It has a tight kitchen, a dining area, and a living room, which is this large, long space here, and a garage and utility rooms off to the side. The curves are really going here, mainly in the living room and around the kitchen. This area here is an area for the violinist to practice. And into this wall here, there's a fitting for keeping his violin. On this side here, there's a large sofa originally, and he could do recitals here, which was separated by curtains, those places, and a kitchen to the side. The upper floor, you went up a staircase from the hall, a very tight, ordinary sort of suburban house, actually. A staircase to the top bathroom, 2 smallish bedrooms, their main room, large sort of dressing area, and then an enormous terrace on the outside, enormous terrace that you go out to, which is less conventional elevations. Views so you can see these shapes and different forms of light. In the entrance door, staircase inside, the curves go on here through the handrail, through the landing, And these things on the ceiling, which I've been trying to work out what they are, I think they're probably for hanging curtains. But this is an original photo. This is a later photo. Stacking tables fitted to the curved wall. Up the handrail, moving up to upstairs. The main living room with this enormous banquette, if you like. Where we're standing is if he was playing his violin, he would play it. The dining area off to the side. The radiators running around the outside. The radiator pipes seem to link one nicely with the back of the banquette seat there, curtains. That's an original photo. Here he is in his alcove, the side. Here is an alcove with a couch where you can see him on it here, lit from the side. And into the wall on the other side was this fitting here, which I'm not sure it's still there, but it had a fold down piece where he kept his violin that opens out. So it's customized. I'm not going to use the word functional, the way they were going about functional things. It's customized to its client. This is as it is today. A lot of these things, these fittings have gone. It's owned by somebody else. Now I'm going to talk about another house for which was a second home. This one for an economist, but a banker, so fairly well off. It's located in an area of a flooded area of the middle of the Netherlands, where they used to extract peat. The means of extracting peat meant that they would dig it out, lay it upside down to dry out, and then cart it off. And that formed a landscape that looked very like this. The dark part being water, the light part being land, left these little islands in between. The peat industry sort of moved on and this area was left. And this chap wanted his house, this is his house, located on two of these adjoining islands, completely surrounded by water, with access to an island, then a bridge, then the house, and then another island, and then water on an east-west aspect. Again, a pitched roof, planning laws in Holland. But this is done all in timber. It's basically piles, and the timber frame going up. A conventional plan with living room, dining, kitchen on the bottom, and bedrooms up above. You can see here how at a larger scale, how the access works to it. But again, curved. So these, like the musician's house, these are extremely ordinary 1930s houses, but they're idiosyncratic in a sort of the way that they're made. In the middle of this one, although it's all done in timber, there's a fireplace in brick that rises up. One side, the kitchen side of this is a double height space with a mezzanine above with the bedrooms over this part here. There you are over its water. There you are, half over the water, half not. You can see that the cladding of it, again, is timber, like a ship cladding with this extraordinary form of jointing that they did there. He didn't make this himself, but this is how it went. Again, inside, the brick fireplace going up, one of his more famous chairs, and a piano, but not a grand one. The flue rising up, double height space over the dining area, the nook, built-in fireplace, window rising up, lights down. The window again with the chairs, staircase, very straightforward staircase, upstairs, that's bedrooms. Right, on to another one. That was in the 1940s. By the 1950s, when he was quite well known, he got quite a number of little houses to do. These are two, and they adjoin each other on adjoining plots. One was for a sculptor, a wife and 3 children, and the other was for Nell Sleep, who was the daughter of someone who worked in his office. So again, sort of negotiations of doing this, how he got his fees and how he did it was probably just by negotiation. They adjoin each other. This is the Sliegers one, which is for the sculptors family, which is in dark here. And this is the other one, the stoop next to it, on a very flat piece of suburban land. the Sneegers one here, there's its plan. This is the sculptor's studio, a large volume on this side with a kitchen, a dining room behind, tiny kitchen in the middle, stairs to the basement, and a wing with the bedrooms in. From the outside approaching it, the large volume of what was the sculptor's studio, you can see here, split into two volumes, a brick one and a glazed one higher in area. That's the sort of working drawings for this. I'll move on. That's the high volume for the sculptor, the side for the kitchen with the picture window. The entrance obscure for the sculptor's studio going in. A black and white photo. There's a sculpture very nicely positioned outside the studio. The entrance to the house, the sort of bedroom wing, and the living part is more to the rear. That's the stoop house further on, the other house a bit further away. The other side, again, a later one where it's grown up. So very simple bungalow, really. But here you can see the glazing to the kitchen and the dining area. The entrance side, a door done to the height the sculpture's got to go in. Very matter of fact, entrance in. The kitchen with the doors, again, clear story lighting that runs through from above. So the slope of the ceiling, again, you can do it now. The 1950s, you can have a pitched roof and do it as a butterfly. But it provides the space for the sculpture above, light to the center of the house and through into the kitchen with the fittings put together. A staircase and an extraordinary stairs down to the basement. Internal glazing to let light through, transparent. Again, kitchen very tightly planned. A very simple, nice little house. Then the one next door is even simpler. Separate garage, a rectangle on the flat. You can see here that the walls between the parts that are voids for windows and the parts that are solid, they're sort of separated out. But this building really is basically a single-story building with a ring beam for its foundations and a ring beam to hold the roof. So in section, you get the simplest thing possible, a ring for foundations at the bottom expressed in a color, a wall plane, a ring beam separating the flat roof from the walls. Plan itself again is very tight around the kitchen. Again, the rectangle is broken up as a way for seeing out. There you are. The roof's very simple, but the roofs float. The spaces float too, actually, in and out. This kitchen is extraordinary. The angles, I mean, this is not like the way that architects normally think. The staircase to the basement down below and everything fitting in. I'll show you some pictures of the kitchen. There it is, a clear story light that lights above and the fittings. A more conventional way, but not really conventional, with the angled seats, the angled chairs. The relationship between the client and the designer comes out. The separated roof, walls. This is the last one I'm going to show. This is, again, right, 58, quite late. This is for somebody slightly wealthier, a surgeon, but his wife was an artist. So again, and it's in a small village. This has a self-contained sort of island to itself, and you approach it off the road through, and it's a fairly simple house here with a view across open land in this direction. So you approach it on the end. I'll skip past that. Clear it. You approach it from, the plan is around the other way. The entrance, you've come from this direction. That's a garage. This is the studio for the wife. You enter past them up into the center of a single-story house. Again, a tight kitchen, bedrooms on the side, a larger living room with a view out on the other side. Here, the volumes, you're going to, by then, probably with the planners, you can do a flat roof. So the volumes of those spaces are expressed in a much more conventional way in different materials in their dimensions. There it is in the Dutch landscape when it was built, flat, the planes and the volumes. You can see them clearly. It looks a bit harsh. You get it in colour, you realise that there's colour on the door to the garage, that the glazed bricks for the studio are abstract in the way that the volumes are expressed in the other parts. The garden's beginning to grow up. This is fairly early on, but they own all this land here and they have this view across here. Nothing much back there, but things are beginning to grow. At the same time, you can see there the different colour brickwork very clearly related to the volumes. Right, we're getting a bit later, things grow up. Again, more present day, this is the approach. So garage, the studio, the entrance around the other side. That's the entrance side from the other side. So again, it's the landscape and the house have grown into this relationship. The living room looks a bit awkward, doesn't it? But on the side here, this is the door into it. Very high ceiling. In these earlier things, this would have been done a bit, colours a bit different perhaps, but no. That's a colour view of that same living room. The entrance hall here, extremely dark the way it's painted. The ceiling's painted quite dark. So what in that black and white photo, is a bland looking space, is articulated by the colour. So, you know, it's coming through same things as you got in the Schroeder house, the use of colour in relation to space in an abstract way to define an atmosphere and something to live with. Here's this living room, more up-to-date. The studio with the glass bricks used as this one at the end here, which looks more like an office now. But again, things have grown up, so the green is there. So there, it has a softness to it. So I'll end the houses on there, remind you of the man himself and his really, really famous chair, and remind you again of the extraordinary Schroeder house, which, and remind you of the quote that Van Doesburg had, art whose function nobody knows hinders the function of life. For the sake of progress, we must destroy art because of the function of the modern life is stronger than art. Every attempt to renew, as I've lost what the word is on there, has failed. They're all bankrupt. That was the thing. But Rietveld and architecture were not bankrupt, and they went on to live to influence other things, which I'd like to talk about on another occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Everybody, I think, has got their microphones muted. So on behalf of the audience, can I just give you a big round of applause, virtual round of applause. And, you know, as usual, you've made the subject really, really accessible and fascinating. And you've highlighted some really stunningly beautiful work. So thank you. Now, I'm not sure where we've got to with questions. I'll just have a chat. I think we've got one. Andrew, yeah. If you have any questions, please could you just scribble them into the chat box for us? I think that's probably more orderly than everybody raising their hands. I think actually at the moment, a lot of people have got their videos. Oh no, videos are coming back on, so that's great. It would be great to see everybody's face, if that's possible.
See a number on
there. Could I just ask you a question, perhaps to start the proceedings? You alluded to the influence of Philip Rietveld's work on others, and I don't want to, you know, steal your thunder for another time, but I thought there might be some connection between his work and the influence that he gave to Corbusier for the the Fondation building, the Villa de Roche. That's right. Is there is there a potential influence there, do you think, in terms of time? I mean, Corbusier was floating around in the background. Was this influential significantly for him?
I think of it by 1923, he's pretty well known. Well, no, he hadn't built that much. No, the Maison La Roche went through a lot of, it was quite a complicated, it was a fearful backland site. And it had a complicated brief for La Roche, who had this collection of paintings he wanted to display. And they were trying to fit in as many houses as possible to make the whole thing viable. I think it was already must have been well advanced when the exhibition came to the Gallery Rosenberg. The point about it, well, actually, is the way you enter the Maison La Roche. It has this 3-story foyer, and in it, the gallery volumes and the house volumes are all sort of room-sized spaces, of extraordinary spaces that link together. But the 3-story part in the middle, the way it's designed in detail with staircases and a bridge leading off it, makes the walls into abstract planes that you're not really sure what size, well, you can see what size they are if you're in them, but they are of a size and a dimension that you can't quite work out what they are. I mean, within the hall, you're actually on the one side where it's 3 stories up. There's a gallery on the first floor, and on the top floor there's the library, or rather the balustrade to the library. But from below, you see it as the end of a plane. And on the other side, towards the 2 houses, the staircases and galleries and sort of bridges that were, of course, behind walls which you can't see. And you have these walls that you have to go and see it. In it, because their scale and is extraordinary. It is recorded. What's his name? The photographer, Richard Parr, has done some marvelous photos, which I didn't put in because I was worried about copyright. But it shows just how that the scale and the feel of the planes of those walls is a still thing.
Okay, thank you. We've got some questions that have come in. Can I first ask you, Philip, on behalf of Natalie Kerr? She asks, in the first house, are the colours we see like the originals?
In the Schroeder house, yes, the Schroeder house has been completely, when Schroeder died, it was handed over to the state, the local, to Utrecht, and restored with great care, with the daughter as well, back completely to its original state, meticulously. Okay.
And from Gillian Hardy, she asks, how did Rietveld and Schroeder meet?
They would have met if they were in the still group, overlapped with other arty groups at that time, and people in Europe travelled backwards. They went together to, say, a poetry reading by Tristan Tzara, poet, the poet who had his house, in Paris, signed by Los. They had Dadaist poetry. Van Dersberg was always getting things on performed, music as well, and galleries. And Rietveld he did a lot of fitting out of people's flats and shop fronts and things like that. Utrecht is a fairly small place, I think, especially.
Okay. Just on behalf of Philip, could I ask everyone if they'd mind unmuting so that, first of all, the individuals who are wanting to ask questions can ask the questions. I see Kate, you've got a question. Would you like to unmute and ask Philip that question yourself, please?
Yes, okay. Well, thanks again for a wonderful talk, Philip. With the Schroeder house, I was a bit puzzled that there seemed to be little or no built-in storage. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder how on earth they exercise such phenomenal discipline as to overwhelmed with the clutter of life. I know that now we have far too much stuff, but they must have had some stuff.
Well, it was all cleared away before the photographer arrived.
Yes, I mean, there was storage. There were quite a number of those multicolored things were boxes for putting things inside. I could go back and show the pan. They all had their own little cupboards as well as the basement. But it was fairly chaotic, apparently. And I've shown it to you in its pristine state. It would have had. Apparently, she was quite. The children were left very much to their own devices, and they probably got up to all sorts of things. There are cupboards in there. If I went back to things, there are cupboards that do tie in with the folding partitions for putting things in.
Okay. Any more questions? No? Well, first of all, Philip, can I say thank you for an absolutely brilliant talk. You really got into your stride, and you know, you made the whole subject really, really accessible as usual. So thank you, and I can't wait for part 2, which you alluded to.
Well, not so much part 2 as the people who grew out of this. I mean, the ones I'm thinking of are Rudolf Schindler in California, whose work is difficult to see, but when you do see it, you realize how much he learned.
Oh, right. Sorry, I've been told that we've got another question, actually, from Leona. Leona, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please? I've got your hand raised. Can you unmute yourself? No? Okay. Okay, no worries. So no more questions, I think. And basically, I would just like to thank Philip. Before I ask you to unmute so that we can all give him a big round of applause, a real round of applause, could I just tell you about our next event? We are, this actually is one not to be missed. It's being given by our go-to person for the subject. The subject is Conal Warden Lucas, and Sally Rendell, who's on our working party, is giving a talk on Tuesday the 10th of November about them. She co-authored the definitive volume of critique and catalogue of their work with Dennis Sharp, and that remains the kind of the go-to book on the subject. Anyway, we will probably have that talk at 5:30 on 10th of November, and we'd love to see you all there then. So we'll do our best to send around the link, but if you can just keep an eye on the website and keep an eye on your inbox for any information coming through, be very grateful. So can I on that basis, can I just thank Philip for preparing this talk and delivering it in a most interesting and lively and enjoyable way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. To see how long it goes on for. Kate McIntosh.
That's that house, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? I mean, what a contrast between the two.
Mm.
I think this was his best work, actually. And in a way, some of the later work seemed a little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is me. This is Angela. Just a last minute thing. Of the picture showing at the moment, I think this is his best work. And I'm slightly disappointed in some of the later works that it didn't live up to this expectation. What do you think?
You want me to say something about that? I think you're right, but in a way, it is strange. I think you're quite right, but the the reason the house is the main thing, and I mean it is so big, and it has so much its own thing. It did influence people, and I think later work comes through in other people's work.
I would like to hear this. We shall probably finish.
Yeah, I'm going to say, because I've gone backwards in this because I got really interested in Eileen Gray. And Eileen Gray did see this work at a particular point in her development. And Eileen Gray's work, because it's so small and damaged, needs some understanding and some talking about, and I'd like to talk about that. The reason for going for this house is that when you see what she did, she could not have got to where she got to without this one extraordinary house. Similarly, Rudolf Schindler, he could not really have done what he did, what he called space architecture, on his own in California, on no budgets, and done extraordinary things without this particular house. And when you visit it, there are very few house museums which you go into that are as emotionally moving as the Schroeder House is. In its reconstructed thought, as an idea and a piece of design, it is extraordinarily moving when you're in it, because it comes out of the two of them, Truss and him, at a point in their lives when they just did things, and it is absolutely overwhelmingly beautiful. There's no escaping that, right? Not only I've said that, I mean the Smithsons have said that. I mean, and I want you all to go and see this house, okay? I've talked about the other ones because in looking at him, I've tried to look at things. I mean, I found the house over the cinema, although architecturally it's eccentric and peculiar. In their time, he lived like that, and it's difficult. It's not a great piece of architecture, but it's somebody's work. And again, it leads back to this house. And whichever direction you go in at what he'd done, it leads back to this house. And so I've shown you the other ones, all right, as a frame to what is a marvelous work of art, which I want you all to see and love. Okay?
Thank you, Philip. Wonderful. And a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. Okay, Philip, I think it's time for the pub, isn't it now?
Oh, yes.
Cheers.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Thank
Okay.
you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting as well.
A pleasure. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. So really, yeah, can't wait to get my train ticket to Utrecht.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much. So I'll call an end to the proceedings,
Okay.
and hope to see you all in November. Cheerio, everybody.